I used to think I understood photographs. You point a camera, you capture what is there. Simple, honest, mechanical. Then I spent 3 months looking at photographs from the 1840s and 1850s, and I have not been the same since. In 1838, Louis Daguerre pointed his camera at the Boulevard du Temple in Paris. This was one of the busiest streets in the city. Theaters, cafes, hundreds of people moving through it every hour. And when the image developed on that polished silver plate, the boulevard was empty. Completely, hauntingly empty. No carriages, no horses, no crowds, just stone and silence. The official explanation is elegant. Long exposure times, 4 to 7 minutes, sometimes longer. Anything that moved could not be recorded. People, carriages, animals, they all blurred into nothing. Only what stood still remained. The buildings, the streets, the infrastructure. I accepted that for years, most of us do. But then I started asking a different question. Not why the people vanished from the photographs, but why the photographs were taken of empty streets at all. Before we go further, I need to connect this to something from the last video in this series about the precision tunnels beneath Europe. If you have not seen it, I will link it below, because what follows shares a thread with that investigation. In that episode, we looked at construction that officially should not exist, tool marks that do not match the era, architecture that precedes the civilization credited with building it. Hold that shape, because the same shape is about to appear again, on the surface this time, in full daylight, captured on silver plates. I want to start with what we know, verified, documented, not disputed by anyone. By 1850, there were over 70 daguerreotype studios operating in New York City alone. 70. The technology had spread across Europe and America at extraordinary speed. And what were these studios photographing? Portraits. Almost exclusively portraits. The Metropolitan Museum of Art confirms this. Before the late 1850s, city views are, and I want to use their exact word here, rare. Landscape studies, they say, were exceedingly so. Here is where it gets interesting. 70 studios, all doing portraits. Portraits require the subject to sit perfectly still for anywhere from 20 seconds to several minutes, depending on the light. Head clamps, armrests, rigid posing stands. The technology was inconvenient, expensive, and demanding, and yet it worked. Millions of daguerreotype portraits survive from this era, crisp, clear, detailed. People held still, and they were captured. So, here is my question. If a person can hold still for 30 seconds and be photographed with extraordinary clarity, why are the streets completely empty? Stay with the timeline. A person standing on a corner, leaning against a lamppost, sitting on a bench, a horse tied to a post, a cart parked at a curb. These are not moving objects. These are stationary elements. They should appear in these images with the same crystalline precision as the buildings themselves. And yet, in photograph after photograph, across multiple cities and multiple continents, the streets are bare. I want to be precise about this. I am not saying the long exposure explanation is wrong. It accounts for moving traffic. It accounts for pedestrians walking through the frame. But it does not account for the total absence of stationary life. Not a single person sitting. Not a single cart parked. Not a single horse tied up. Not one shop owner standing in a doorway. The academic historian Kim Bale studied this problem. She noted that the inability to capture even slow-moving objects was considered one of the medium's major shortcomings at the time. When shorter exposure times finally became possible in the late 1850s, a British photographer marveled that city views would no longer seem, and I am quoting carefully here, that they would no longer seem as if they were struck by plague, given the deserted aspect of their streets and squares. Plague-stricken. That is the word a contemporary photographer used. Not technically limited, not artistically composed, plague-stricken, as if the cities had been emptied by catastrophe. I could be wrong, but the word choice is hard to ignore. Now, let me take you somewhere uncomfortable. In 1853, a French-born photographer named Victor Prévost began what the Metropolitan Museum describes as a speculative project to create a photographic catalog of the changing shape of New York City. He called it a monument constantly in the making. That phrase has stayed with me. a monument constantly in the making, as if the city itself was unfinished, as if it was still becoming what it would be. And in that same year, 1853, something else happened. On the other side of the Atlantic, Emperor Napoleon III appointed a man named Georges Eugène Haussmann as the prefect of the Seine. Haussmann's instructions were simple: open up Paris, bring in light and air, unify it, make it beautiful. What followed was one of the most aggressive demolition campaigns in the history of any city. Between 1853 and 1870, Haussmann demolished approximately 20,000 buildings. 12,000 of them were medieval structures. He displaced 350,000 Parisians. He employed 60,000 workers. And in their place, he built 34,000 new buildings, all with uniform facades, uniform height, uniform cream-colored stone. The official record frames this as modernization, cholera prevention, traffic management, urban beautification. And those reasons are real. Paris in the 1840s was overcrowded, unsanitary, and politically volatile. Barricades went up in narrow streets during at least 7 armed uprisings between 1830 and 1848. Haussmann himself had no training in architecture or urban planning. He called himself an artiste démolitionnier, an artist demolitionist. He spoke positively in his memoirs about the gutting of Paris. He razed the house he was born in. His photographer, Charles Marville, was hired by the city to document the buildings before they were torn down. Marville's camera was called the Finger of Death. Wherever he pointed it, a building or an entire neighborhood soon disappeared. Think about that for a moment. The same city, the same decade. One camera captures the streets empty. Another camera documents the buildings just before they are erased. 2 lenses pointed at the same place, recording 2 different kinds of absence. But I want you to hold 2 facts together. Fact 1. The photographs of Paris before Haussmann show monumental architecture, grand boulevards, neoclassical facades already standing. The Boulevard du Temple, where Daguerre took his famous photograph, was lined with theaters, cafes, and shops. The architecture was already there. The grandeur was already there. Fact 2. Haussmann then demolished 20,000 buildings and built 34,000 new ones in their place, all with a unified aesthetic, designed to erase the visual character of what came before. I am not making this as a claim, I am making it as a shape. The shape of a city that was photographed empty. Then rebuilt from scratch, with the previous version erased so completely that today we call the replacement the real Paris. If you are finding this worth your time, and I hope you are, consider subscribing. This series goes places that most channels will not touch, and having you along for it means everything. Now, back to the timeline. Because the timeline gets stranger. In 1853, the same year Prévost began cataloging the changing shape of New York and Haussmann began demolishing Paris, a young minister named Charles Loring Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in New York City. Here is what the record says. By 1850, the streets of New York were home to an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 homeless children. The police called them street rats. They slept under stairwells, in doorways. They're in the alleys of a neighborhood called 5 Points, which had the highest recorded rate of violent death of any slum in the world. Brace looked at these children and proposed something unprecedented. He would put them on trains heading west, to Michigan, to Iowa, to Kansas, to every one of the 48 contiguous states. Families in rural communities could come to the train station, inspect the children, and take them home. On October 1st, 1854, the first train departed with 46 children. By the time the program ended in 1929, an estimated 250,000 children had been relocated. 250,000. I want to be clear that I am presenting this as a question, not a conclusion. The official explanation is that these children were orphans and runaways, all products of immigration and poverty. And that explanation accounts for much of it. The Irish famine of the 1840s flooded New York with desperate families. Cholera swept through in 1849 and 1854. Parents died. Children were left behind. This is documented. This is real. But not all of them were orphans. Brace himself acknowledged that many had living parents. Some were taken from families that Brace deemed unfit. often poor Catholic immigrants, whom he described in language I will not repeat here, and the children were told to forget their past entirely. They were told it never happened. They were told to tell no one, with punishment promised if they did. What do you do when a city is full of children who belong to no one? Or rather, what do you do when a city has been emptied and refilled? Oh, and the children are evidence of whoever was there before. That last question is mine, not the historical records. The historical record does not ask that question. And maybe that is the point. Let me pause here, because I want to be honest about something. When I first encountered the orphan train records, I did not connect them to the photographs. They seemed like two separate threads in 19th century history. One was about technology and its limitations. The other was about poverty and philanthropy. Clean categories, tidy explanations. But then I looked at the dates, and once I looked at the dates, the categories stopped being so clean. Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in 1853, the same year Haussmann began tearing Paris apart. And at the same year, Prévost began his photographic catalog of a city he described as a monument constantly in the making. 3 events, 3 cities, 1 year. Coincidence is a word we use when we do not want to see the pattern. I am trying not to use it. And there is another detail in the orphan train records that deserves attention. The children who were placed out were overwhelmingly selected for their ability to integrate. They were mostly white, mostly from Western European backgrounds, chosen to match the families receiving them. Children who did not fit that profile, children who were not white, children with disabilities, older children, they were generally excluded. The system was not just relocating children, it was curating a population, selecting who would carry the story forward and who would be left behind. That is not a conspiracy. That is the documented policy of the Children's Aid Society. It is in their own records. And the question it raises is not whether it happened, but why it needed to happen at that particular scale, in that particular moment, in cities that were being simultaneously photographed empty and rebuilt from the ground up. Now, I need you to zoom out with me, because this is not just Paris, this is not just New York. The same pattern, the same eerie emptiness appears in daguerreotypes from London, from Moscow, from cities across Europe and the Americas. The long exposure explanation is applied universally, and yet the question remains. Where are the stationary objects? Where are the parked carts and the tied horses and the people who were not moving? Consider this. In 1845, these daguerreotypes of Athens show the Acropolis and the surrounding city in extraordinary detail, empty. In 1850, a photograph of Bombay, taken when India was still under the rule of the British East India Company, shows wide, spacious roads and monumental architecture, empty. In 1848, a daguerreotype of Manhattan shows a farmhouse on a hill where Broadway now runs, the Upper West Side, empty land where millions now live. This photograph sold at auction for over $60,000, as if the emptiness itself had value, as if someone wanted to own the proof. Copenhagen, 1840, empty. Edinburgh, 1848, empty. Singapore, 1844, empty. Chicago, 1855, the oldest known photograph in the city's history, showing the Cook County Courthouse, empty. I would be curious to know if any of you have come across daguerreotypes from your own cities showing this same emptiness, because the more I look, the more cities I find, and the more cities I find, the harder it becomes to believe that long exposure times are the only thing we are looking at. And here is where the architecture problem enters. I will need an entire video for the full scope of it, but let me give you the shape. The neoclassical buildings that appear in these photographs, the massive colonnaded structures with Doric and Ionic columns, the civic buildings with domes modeled after the Pantheon in Rome, the geometrically precise facades of cut stone. These structures were officially built using horse-drawn technology. No cranes, no powered equipment, no steel reinforcement, horses, pulleys, manual labor, hand-cut stone. I know that is a significant claim to leave hanging, but consider the United States Capitol building. Construction began in the 1790s. It was originally proposed as a brick structure because American builders were, and I am quoting the historical record directly, still uncomfortable and quite untrained in using ashlar masonry. The dome was not completed until 1863, using a new material, cast iron, that pushed builders to, again quoting, their technological limits. 70 years. One building, using the most advanced resources of the American government. And yet, the daguerreotypes show entire cities of comparable architecture, standing complete, standing empty, as if waiting for someone to arrive. Let me say that again more slowly. The official construction timeline for a single building of this caliber is measured in decades. The photographs show entire metropolitan skylines of this caliber already complete, and the cities in those photographs are empty. Either these cities were built by a civilization with construction capabilities far beyond what we attribute to the era, or they were inherited. I am presenting this as a question, not a conclusion. There is a name that keeps appearing in these records, a name connected to something I am not ready to discuss yet, but I want to plant it here so you know it is coming, now. The counter-argument, and it deserves fair treatment. The long exposure explanation is not wrong. It is verifiable. It is physics. Silver halide crystals require sustained light to form an image. Unmoving objects do not provide sustained light from a fixed position. They blur. They vanish. This is not disputed. And there are other factors worth naming. Early photographers were not always interested in capturing people. The technology was originally celebrated for its ability to reproduce architecture and landscape with scientific precision. Some photographers deliberately chose early morning hours or quiet moments to avoid the problem of moving subjects entirely. And the equipment itself was enormous, heavy, difficult to transport, and required chemical preparation on site. You did not casually set up a daguerreotype camera on a busy sidewalk. All of that is real. All of it matters. And if the emptiness appeared in one city, or in one decade, or from one photographer, I would accept it as a complete explanation. But it does not appear in one city. It appears in dozens, across continents, spanning 2 decades. And it resolves almost exactly when faster exposure times arrive, in the late 1850s. That simultaneity bothers me. What I am questioning is whether the explanation is sufficient, whether it accounts for everything we see, or only part of it. The official explanation accounts for some of this, but not all of it. And the part it does not account for is the part worth examining. A British photographer in the 1850s noted that when faster exposure times arrived, cities suddenly appeared alive with the busy throng of their motley populations, as if the life had always been there, hidden by the limitations of the camera, or as if the life had finally arrived. Either the technology was hiding people who were there all along, or the people were not there yet. Both explanations fit the evidence. I know which way I lean, but I want to hear where you land, the timing. That is what keeps me awake. 1838. Daguerre photographs an empty Paris boulevard. 1850. Over 70 studios in New York. Portraits booming, but the streets remain empty in outdoor photographs. 1853. Brace founds, the Children's Aid Society. Haussmann begins demolishing Paris. Prévost begins cataloging the changing shape of New York. 1854. The first orphan train departs with 46 children. Late 1850s. Faster exposure times arrive. And suddenly, people appear in the photographs. The streets fill up. The emptiness ends. What if the photographs are not hiding people who were there? What if the photographs are the most honest record we have of a transition? A gap between whoever built these cities and whoever moved in. If this feels like too much, I understand. But stay with me. Because the orphan trains did not just relocate children, they relocated identity. The children were told to forget their names, forget their parents, forget their origins. They were given new families, new stories, new histories. Of the 250,000 children placed by the program, an estimated 2 million descendants are alive today. 2 million Americans whose origin stories were deliberately interrupted. What do you think happened in those cities before the trains? I am asking sincerely. The historical record is incomplete here, and that incompleteness itself is worth studying. We have a period, roughly 1840 to 1860, where the largest cities in the Western world were photographed in a state that contemporary observers described as plague-stricken. We have a massive institutional effort to relocate homeless children, many of whom were not orphans, out of those same cities. We have a parallel effort to demolish and rebuild the physical fabric of those cities, replacing what stood before with something new and uniform. And we have a technological transition that conveniently renders the early evidence, the empty photographs, explainable by a single technical limitation. Maybe that explanation is sufficient, but the timing is worth examining. The same decade, the same cities, empty photographs, massive relocation of unattached children, bus demolition of existing architecture, rapid construction of replacement structures, and then, when the camera becomes fast enough to capture moving life, the streets are suddenly full. That is not a conclusion. That is a pattern. And patterns, in my experience, do not care whether you are comfortable with them. I have been sitting with these questions for months, and they have not resolved. They have only deepened. There is a connection here to something happening in the architectural record of the 1850s that I will get to in a future episode. The construction problem. How do you build a city of marble and stone with horses and hand tools? And why does the construction record for so many of these buildings begin after the buildings appear in photographs? That question terrifies me a little. Why? It's not because the answer might be strange, but because no one seems to be asking it. I spent a week looking for a single academic paper, one paper, that addresses the discrepancy between the construction timelines of these buildings and their appearance in daguerreotypes. I could not find one. Not because the answer exists and I missed it, but because the question has not been posed. The emptiness in the photographs has been explained. The construction of the buildings has been explained, but no one has placed those two explanations next to each other and noticed that they contradict. That is not an accusation, it is an observation, and observations, unlike accusations, can be tested. The historical record is incomplete here, and that incompleteness itself is worth studying. Not because something is being hidden, necessarily, but because the questions were never asked in the first place. And when a question is never asked, the silence compounds. Year after year, decade after decade, until the silence itself becomes the answer. Until the absence of inquiry becomes evidence that no inquiry was needed. But it was needed. It is needed. If this series is worth something to you, consider sharing your thoughts or your theories below. The comments on this series have become a research thread in themselves. If you know something about this that I have missed, the comments are where this research actually grows. The next video goes somewhere I was not sure I was ready to go. I think I am now. See you there.